Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the second season of Among the Ancients, a close reading series from the London Review of Books with me, Thomas Jones, and Emily Wilson. Today we're talking about the histories of Herodotus, and I thought, if it's okay with you, Emily, that we could begin going straight in with a short reading of the opening sentence in Tom Holland's translation.
Herodotus, from Halicarnassus, here displays his enquiries that human achievement may be spared the ravages of time, and that everything great and astounding, and all the glory of those exploits which serve to display Greeks and barbarians alike to such effect, be kept alive. And additionally, and most importantly, to give the reason they went to war.
So there's no invocation to the muses, there's no poetry, or at least it's not in verse, but rather the revelation, the display of the inquiries or the research, the historia of Herodotus of Halicarnassus. So the first word of his book, and it's the first of nearly 185,000 words, it's a very long book.
Very long.
It's his own name. So who was Herodotus, Emily, and how much do we know about him?
Well, as he says, Halicarnassus is his birthplace, and that seems to be pretty undisputed. I mean, as with so many ancient authors, we really don't know as much as we'd like for sure about Herodotus, because most of our evidence comes from the Suda, which is something like 1,000 years later than the actual life of Herodotus. So to what extent is that reliable? I mean, one can debate that, and it is much debated. It seems that he came from Halicarnassus, which is important for reading the histories because Halicarnassus was under Persian rule. So he has a personal interest in thinking about both Greek tyranny and the Persian Empire.
So that's on the coast of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, not modern Greece.
Yes, exactly. So the eastern part of the Greek-speaking world. And then that also matters for the language he writes in. So Halicarnassus was a Dorian city. He writes in Ionian dialect of Greek. So he's writing in a kind of Greek which is different from the Athenian Attic dialect of Plato and other authors you might read from the classical period. We're told, again, by these later biographical sources that he went to Samos. It seems that he also has an interest in the island of Samos, which comes up in the histories as well. We have debatable evidence that he seems to have been closely related to, and perhaps he was his uncle, an epic poet who wrote about both Heracles and the colonies of those Ionian cities. So he seems to have come from a literary family. He also presumably traveled around all over the place. The question of how much he actually traveled and based his research on eyewitness reports, again, is very much debatable. He says he went to Egypt. He doesn't say he went directly to the heart of the Persian Empire. So a lot of that reporting about Persia doesn't seem to be based on actual going to do the research in that way. But we are also told that he traveled to Athens. He presented his researches in Athens as lectures. We're told by later sources that he also presented them at the Olympic Games. We're also told that he lived the last years of his life in Thurii, which had been Sybaris, which comes up in the histories, and is modern Calabria. So he traveled a lot. I mean, for an ancient person, he traveled a great deal. And then beyond that, the details of where was he when, one can debate about that.
And his dates, very roughly, I mean, again, that's disputed, but...
That's disputed, so roughly 485-ish, and then he doesn't refer to anything later than about 430, so he seems to have lived just to the start of the Peloponnesian War. It's quite possible that he died of plague, because of course there was the plague in Athens in that period. Some people say maybe he lived longer, maybe the histories are more explicitly meditating on the comparisons that are implicit between Persian War and the Peloponnesian War, but that's not direct in anything in the histories.
And given his apparent willingness to talk about everything, it doesn't seem like his mode to be referring obliquely to something.
If he knows some great stories, he's going to share the great stories no matter what. Yeah.
So the exploits in Tom Holland's word for you've referred to the Persian Wars. So obviously, without being quite as exhaustive as Herodotus, could you give a brief run through of what the period of history that the histories cover?
The Persian Wars, yes. I mean, maybe just to get back to that first sentence for a second. I mean, so as you said, he says he's doing historia, which is a finding out or research. He also says he's looking for the itier, the reason why they fought each other. And he presents it, as you say, in prose, but it's not entirely unepic. He also says that he wants the deeds of the Greeks and the barbarians, or the non-Greeks, to be not akleia, not lacking kleos, which of course is what Achilles wants. In a way, it's an epic purpose as well as the new form of prose purpose. The Persian Empire was this huge empire, and in a way there's something sort of bogus in the start about presenting Greeks and barbarians as if they were sort of parallel. The Greeks are this piffling little tiny group of communities in a very, very small area of the Mediterranean world. The Persian Empire is this enormous behemoth. In a way, the history is sort of divided into two sequences. Darius invades the Greek-speaking world, and there's the Battle of Marathon. The Greeks fight him off. And then in the next generation, his son Xerxes again does this huge endeavor to invade the Greek-speaking world. And miraculously, the tiny number of Greek cities that want to stand up against the empire do so. And thanks to the courage of Athens and Sparta, they head off the Persians and liberty triumphs and the West is born. It's kind of the narrative that the histories culminate in. And of course, one can dig into the degree to which Herodotus himself buys into that narrative, but he's the locus classicus for giving us some version of that story.
And those last battles, the Thermopylae and Salamis, and I mean, you've said how it's, the sort of the epic purpose, and they have become, as legendary as the Trojan War, really. There's the movie of 300 in the Frank Miller comic book, and the idea that Thermopylae really happened, more or less, as Herodotus tells us, is sort of, it's important to remember it's history in a way that the Trojan War isn't. Do I mean that? I don't know. Tell me if
yes,
I mean that.
I don't know if you mean that. That question of to what extent is Herodotus a reliable source for anything, including these very important historically battles? He's in many ways the only source for a lot of this stuff, and therefore he's, we have to make use of him. But it's not like he wasn't there at Thermopylae. And there are also ways that even if you sort of do a close reading of what exactly is he saying about Leonidas and the Spartiates keeping the pass at Thermopylae, in some moments he seems to be suggesting it really was only 300 people, and then all their helots and all the other Greeks who came with them. So maybe it actually was like 2,000 people, but we're going to focus on Leonidas. And so that's also part of how his narrative works, is that we get this intense focus on very vivid, colourful characters. And some of the time you get an acknowledgement that there are actually quite a lot of other people involved too, but let's get back to the colourful characters.
And of course, but by talking about Thermopylae, it's my fault for bringing it in, but we are very much skipping to the end, because that appears in book 8 of the 9 books of the histories. And in a sense, the Persian Wars, in the sense of Darius and Xerxes' invasions, that's very much towards the second half. And that idea that the enormousness of the Persian Empire and that the Greek world is one small corner of it. That's clear from reading Herodotus, because before we can get to this, you have to talk about the rise of Cyrus the Great, his conquest of Babylon, and Babylon falls twice in the course of the book, doesn't it? Herodotus acknowledges the vastness of the Persian Empire and the relative smallness of the Greeks in the structure of the book.
He also acknowledges that what he sets up in that first sentence of there are just two types of people, the Greeks and the Barbaroi, is it doesn't really work, because the Greeks themselves are completely diverse in his own account. They live in very different kinds of communities, very different politics, very different cultures. And also the Barbaroi themselves, part of what we get from the first books is this real awareness of cultural ethnographic difference, that he spends the whole of book 2 digging deep into the extraordinary culture of the Egyptians and their very stable, fertile lifestyle and their religion and their ways of death and their ways of government. He digs very deep into the nomadic Scythians, who are so different both from the very stable Egyptians and from the Greeks and from the Persians. And so he has this very layered awareness of people are not all the same, and there aren't just two different ways of life, as you might think from that first sentence.
And even that word, that barbaros, which can be translated as barbarian, and it's the root of the English word barbarian. But, are there more neutral ways of translating it?
Yes, in a way I'm quite surprised that the Holland translation goes for that, because some older translations translate it as non-Greek or as foreigner. It literally suggests somebody who doesn't speak Greek. So it's somebody who says bar, 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 you can't understand anything they say. And of course, they could be speaking any number of languages. And Herodotus himself also has an interest in language. We don't know how many languages he actually spoke. Presumably, a lot of his evidence comes through interpreters. But he's interested in language and signs, and he doesn't sort of think everything people say is nonsense if it's not in Greek. So I'm not sure that the negative connotations of the modern word barbarian quite capture what he means by barbaroi, meaning a non-Greek person, a non-Greek speaking person.
Thanks for listening to this extract from Among the Ancients 2, a close reading series from the London Review of Books. To listen to the full episode and all our other close reading series, including Series 1 of Among the Ancients, sign up to our close reading subscription at lrb.me/close readings or click on the link in the description.